So system one is immediate, it's impulsive. Yeah, it's that immediate. You look at a social media post, you get that initial emotional reaction. So imagine that, how that affects younger kids, age 16 and below. They just simply don't have the neurological hardware to make decisions that are best for their long term. But again, with these phones, there just isn't that endpoint on most of these apps. And that is by design, because it keeps your attention and it keeps you attached to it. When you're talking about these devices, you're not just fighting the world, you're fighting a multi-billion-dollar organizations that are actually designed to get you to stay addicted, essentially, to these devices.
Let's uncover what is Better with Humans. Welcome to the first episode of Better with Humans. I'm joined by my good friend Richard Lalchan, a digital wellbeing and clarity coach. Richard helps parents and leaders reclaim their God-given commission from addictive algorithms by bridging the gap between ancient faith, renewing the mind, and modern tech. So Richard, welcome. Anything else you'd like to add to that introduction?
No, nothing that won't necessarily come up in our conversation. Author as well, so we'll touch on that, no doubt. So yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool. Not going to spoil any surprises. So today, Richard and I, we've known each other for around 3 years now, and we really have spoken a lot around the impact of technology. There's various things that happen around the world, particularly on technology, and it's really been on Richard's heart looking at what's the impact of that on our kids. And in the conversations I've had with Richard, we've actually explored quite a bit about what happens when technologies, things like mobile phones, when they get introduced, we allow them into our lives. And it's not the impact of it we don't look at until later. And we go, oh, no, look at the impact it's had on our children. Look at the impact it's had on our lives. I look at TV, and I go, yeah, look at the impact TV had on my life and a computer when I had a TV and a computer in my room. So we're really going to be looking at exploring particularly the impact of technology and AI on our kids. So actually, as I just mentioned about smartphones, Richard, what is so bad about kids having smartphones?
Well, yeah, it's obviously such a hot topic at the moment. And the good first thing I should say is it's great now that there are many more people talking about it. When some of us were looking at this, years ago, hardly anyone was talking about it. So it's great that it's that people are talking about it. And yeah, like I say, it's such a hot topic with now, phone bans in school and various sort of state-driven social media bans and ongoing consultations that there are. So, but one aspect I'd like to almost start looking at is actually just how our brains work and how it works with that, and look at how the impact of the technology on our brains. So there's a wonderful book called Thinking Fast and Slow by a guy called Daniel Kahneman. And he explains the brain in this way. He talks about system one and system two thinking. So system one is immediate, it's impulsive. Yeah, it's that immediate, you look at a social media post, you get that initial emotional reaction. And that's actually done with the amygdala part of our brain. And then we have system two, which is much more slow, much more considered. It's if you think of them as like the system one is like the accelerator pedal, and system two is the brakes. So it holds us back, helps us to think, and that's why he calls it thinking fast and slow. So, but it's not that system one is bad and system two is good. Imagine if there was a fire in your house and someone shouted fire. You don't want to be waiting for ages, thinking slowly, is this true? Is this not true? You want to pretty soon get out there. So it's using them in the right way. So actually the system two comes out of our prefrontal cortex, and that's the decision-making center of our brain where we make those sort of executive decisions. But the interesting thing that people don't necessarily know is that part of our brain doesn't mature until the age of sort of 24 to 26. So you think about the impact of that, the decisions that we're making that are really long-term as well. So it's not just the immediate, what's going to suit me now. It's actually, how does this decision I'm making now affect me in, months, years time? So a good example of this is, when Facebook first came out, and years after it came out, actually, when people were used to it, there was all of these posts with university students. Obviously, it started in universities, and there was a lot of these sort of alcohol-fueled exploits that were getting posted. The students posting them themselves, and part of that, so you're talking 18 to sort of 21-year-olds, and they're not really thinking about what impact is this going to have on my work, career security, several years down the line, because it's all about now and getting that sort of social approval and things like that. But that's 19, 20-year-olds. So imagine that, how that affects younger kids, age 16 and below, who they just simply don't have the neurological hardware, if I can put it like that, to make decisions that are best for their long term. So then when they're given a phone or they're given a device that's got a bottomless scroll, you think of Instagram, you think of WhatsApp, or WhatsApp to an extent, and TikTok, things like that, anything that doesn't have, that is basically an endless scroll. They don't have the ability to self-regulate. If you think about having a book, reading a book, even like a kid's book, which you've made one yourself, haven't you? So with a book, you're reading it. You've got to start, and you've got an end point. Yeah, you finish the book, you close it, you decide what you're going to do next. When you're scrolling on these phones or looking at YouTube, you don't have an end point, and so having that ability to regulate is so crucial. I guess another example would be overeating. With eating, whatever meal you've got, you're going to finish it at some point, or if you're eating after chocolate, a lot of time you're going to run out of chocolate. Yeah, but again, with these phones, there just isn't that end point on most of these apps, and that is by design, because it keeps you, keeps your attention, and it keeps you attached to it, that you want to keep coming back to the device. But, saying all of that can be, it's easy to kind of like then say, well, shouldn't parents be doing more, and sort of point fingers. But, someone looking at this from the outside, I'm not a parent myself. I see it very much as pretty much like a trap that you get in to. The idea of sitting your child in front of an iPad or giving them a smartphone just to get 5 minutes peace, is completely understandable. But the problem is that's quickly become the default. So, I mean, it'd be interesting to know some of your things as a parent as well. There are things that you've kind of found that you relate to in terms of the devices.
Well, it's interesting. There's a couple of things that come to mind. I think one is that when we look at the progression of mobile phones, that we did used to have devices that all they could do was make a phone call, send a text. The texts were really expensive when we first had proper mobile phones. Ones that weren't bricks that we had to carry around, but you could fit in your pocket. What we found was, you'd use them sparingly, because actually also the calls were relatively expensive. So you would tend to still use them the way that you used the physical wall phone, because you'd have to pick it up and you make a phone call, you'd go and see your friend. That was it, really. It wasn't, my parents maybe on the odd occasion might use it to call, but not, because it was still quite expensive. I might use it to call them to say where I was out, or ask for a lift. So it was really just a tool. And of course, as it progressed into starting to have, games on there, and then development of Apple, and then the App Store, of course, created a whole different beast, which we weren't necessarily really prepared for. And that's part of the challenge, isn't it, with the emergence of technology, is that some parents would have gone, yeah, okay, fine, that you can have that And at some point it was okay. So for us, our generation going, well, yeah, we were fine. Actually, we didn't even have mobile phones, or, even some of the younger than us did have mobile phones.
Mm.
Like, yeah, that's okay. So that's just part of the challenge, isn't it? Because part of some of what we're talking about is having to have a bit of a future thinking mindset of going, let's not just go, well, what's the impact right now? What's the impact in the future? And as a parent, if we just take technology aside completely, and you just look at it as a parent, you want to see your children grow and you want them to be empowered. And empowerment means you have to let them at times make their own mistakes. I remember with my youngest daughter when she was small, when she was a toddler, and there's a little step with her aunt's place, and we were worried about her going up and down the step, like, oh, is she going to fall? And we just had to go, no, we just had to say to ourselves, okay, she's got to give it a go, and it's just a step, and she stumbled a few times, but eventually by the end of that day, she was running up and down this one step. Now, if we'd actually every single time held her hand and gone up and down, she wouldn't have got there as quickly. Maybe she shouldn't have got there at all. We just don't know. So that there is that element of we have to kind of let our kids let go. And I think that plays into when we do think about the use of technology. And then, of course, there's also peer pressure. It's like, oh, my friend's got the phone. So it is a real challenge in terms of can sometimes feel like you're fighting the world.
Yeah, a good way to put it in terms of like fighting the world. Because when you're talking about these devices, you're not just fighting the world, you're fighting a multi-billion-dollar organizations that are actually designed to get you to stay addicted, essentially, to these devices. So when you're talking about an individual parent, it's like almost like what can they do? Well, it's very difficult for the individual parent. I mean, there are things we can do, and we'll come on to those. But you're fighting against this whole industry, which is designed to essentially their business models are made on you being addicted essentially to their devices. But with the you mentioned about your daughter and letting her go. Obviously, that's the challenge with the devices, because it's very difficult. There's so many things that it does to inhibit progression, developmental progression, that when it comes to devices, I'd almost say you can't just, let them go. I know that's not what you were saying, but with the devices, you can't just sort of let them go. And it's very much should be parental monitored all the time, because effectively it can help in some of the problems can be that it's rewiring them to see these devices as the pacifiers. Yeah. And the problem with that is that it can essentially end up being that's what they might use to self-soothe. So they're not really emotionally regulating. So when they're angry, frustrated, they get the screen. And so that's sort of built into them. Whereas actually life is full of, pre-screens, life is full of anger, frustration, thought, and you have to kind of like deal with things like that without having a, device to soothe. I think one of the other challenges is the whole sort of screen time issue. Yeah. So, because people, the problem of sort of say minimizing screen time is focused on, in my opinion, a bit too much, because it's actually, the issue isn't the screen time. It's actually thinking about, well, what are they not doing when they're looking at the screen? And again, that links to things like boredom and daydreaming. All of these kind of things are good for us as humans, and we need them. They really help our brains develop, and creativity and critical thinking come out of some of those things. And so having the device in front of you is sort of inhibiting that, rather than the free-flowing being able to be bored, and come up with your own solutions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's like sleep as well and dreaming, isn't it? It's that same thing that there are things that our brain needs time, even just quiet time. I find it difficult myself. My brain's going 100 miles an hour often. But however, I know that going for a walk with nothing, leaving my phone, it must feel liberating. And it's like weird. Why does it feel liberating? Not to just even have the feeling of the phone in my pocket. But at that point, I can't be contacted. I can't be dragged into doing some doom scrolling. And as you said, doing that endless scrolling. And I think it really is going back to what we said about the battle, because I think one of the challenges that parents have is, and it really is that thing as should I not, have the device. I'll give a device and, maybe I can track them. I can call them. I can know where they are. So there is that element of them wanting to parents wanting to just feel that security. But one of the challenges is, even if you lock down, and that's what I did with my daughters who were younger, you lock them down and they have limited ability to what they can do on the phone. The challenge is that it's not really very accessible. And like you talked about screen time, that's really about it, isn't it? As far as, restrictions. I mean, you can restrict apps and things, but it's just not really designed. The phones are not designed that way. The applications that are developed to do that are few and far between. And I say it's not really, as we said, the ecosystem is not really focused on let's actually make sure the children are kind of using it for the right reasons. As you said, I mean, I really love that analogy of a pacifier, because actually that's reality. Or if you go somewhere, and it's not, and this is not, we don't want to sound critical because we're kind of older. It's just that when we look at, you go into a restaurant, you see kids with phones and tablets, it's just kind of sad. I mean, I think because it's just that actually in that moment, as you say, there is such a powerful opportunity to help our kids in interaction. And so if interaction gets taken away, then obviously that's more of a challenge.
Just in a slight defence of people in that situation, just in the case, again, it's, and I've done this as well. So it can be very quick to judge people in that situation. But I guess you don't always know whether that child, for example, has particular condition where they can't communicate without it. That's rare. That's extremely rare, but it is possible. So it's just all.
Oh yeah. Totally. This is not. Yeah, definitely. We're not sort of. This isn't about judgment. It's actually just it's observing and saying, well, this is a. It wouldn't be great if it's a different way. I mean, I've got a friend, and who has a son, and he has learning difficulties. He's autistic, and you just have to let him wander around the restaurant. I mean, if he's going to take him somewhere, you cannot expect him to sit. And so even if he had a device, he might use it for a short period of time, but he has to be in a place where he can wander around a little bit. He won't just be able to sit. And so that's, of course, the thing, isn't it? I think it isn't about, and that's the other thing, is interesting thing, isn't it? That, as you say, there is the element of we don't know. Maybe there are reasons for that, and we need to, that the kids need that particularly because they might even be non-verbal. And so there's obviously those scenarios, but it's also that other challenge of looking at it and going, well, yeah, I mean, what are we doing it for? I guess that's a really good question, isn't it? Is asking the question. So less thinking about as an observer going, oh, they're doing that or they're doing this, but going, I don't really know what they're doing it for. And, but the questions we're asking ourselves if we're giving children phones and things in any situation, if it's a situation where we're like, okay, and I, of course, as a parent, you totally, you would give them things, but it isn't necessarily a phone, but you'll find something to get them to occupy them, particularly mothers, if they've been with a child all day and maybe there's been a difficult day, maybe the child is maybe ill or just, there's been a lot going on, and so that, you can understand there's times, if I could just get them to give me 15 minutes apiece, then that would be really helpful to do this. So there's certainly, we can understand why. And of course, as you say, it's important. not be judgmental, but it's also being honest about that's the reality, isn't it?
Yeah,
That
yeah. I mean,
we don't know, and we can make those like snap assessments, which, as you say, are not always necessarily accurate.
yeah, that's the system one kicking in. But yeah, I mean, in terms of again, it's looking at what it does long term, and I mean, Jonathan Haidt, who's a absolutely one of the experts in this area, key voice in this area, and personally, I think it's largely because of him and writing books like The Anxious Generation that some of the governments are talking about some of these bans. But he talks about the whole idea of where we've essentially replaced play-based childhood with phone-based childhood. So that whole idea of what you get with the play, with the rough and tumble, all of that kind of thing, your brain is processing all of that in a different way than just sitting in front of a screen. It's allowing it to develop in different, more human ways. So that's really quite key. But I mean, another sort of issue when it comes to that is things like social isolation and social contagion. And by that, I mean that, the tech companies have designed these tools so well that they become, when you're talking about, say, schools, they become the hub of all communications. So the social life of that child is focused around these tools now. I've seen it in families I know well, where the kids are just, using particularly WhatsApp. Again, even if it's a cut down, minimized version, but they're still using that. So, of course, if you don't have a phone or you don't have a phone with WhatsApp, the child feels completely left out. They're considered, a social leper. And again, unless there's sort of this collective, I think Jonathan Haidt calls it, it's like collective action trap. So basically, unless you've got, say, all parents or many parents coming together and deciding what to do, then that actually a lot of their children are not going to have a phone or going to have a cut down phone, then it's very difficult, isn't it, for that one or two that feel like that social leper.
Yeah, it's interesting because it reminds me of, at school actually. It reminds me of being at school and not getting picked, in the teams of football. And no, I don't want Sean in my team. And it is, we and I think growing up we'll have experienced that. And I wonder how much that comes into play as we make those decisions about wanting to make sure that our children don't experience that pain, because I mean it can be feel like left out. And that's a really interesting observation, as you say, that actually it's a collective. And this is the difficult thing, isn't it? That it doesn't take, we often say, it only takes one person, but it might only take one person, but that person needs to find the another person and another person to be able to say collectively, we can come together as a group and we can bring our children and we can have them play together and we can do that. But it's so interesting that something else that I came across recently was someone that found it difficult to communicate, so they would use their phone to write things down and show you to read it as well. So that's that interesting that we have these very positive elements where mobile phones can be very powerful tools, but what we've seen is that actually the direction of a lot of the actual use of the phones, and that's predominantly come from, as you say, that we've come from the organizations that are saying, actually we want you to consume our content, and not only want you to consume our content, we'll actually get other people to create the content. So it's a win-win. There's little for us to do other than manage the platform and keep you on the platform so that we can advertise to you, so that we can, and it isn't to say that there isn't, again, in these platforms where we have found advantage and we find we're able to connect with people, but it's how we balance those things, isn't it? I mean, how do you balance that in your own life? How do you balance the amount of time?
I mean, before I come on to that, just it's interesting just thinking about the schools putting on the devices and things like that. I mean that is a big problem in itself, because you've essentially got these big tech companies who have got contracts with the Department for Education, with the individual schools, and they're pushing their technology, onto the schools, and the schools have got struggling with budgets and things like that, and so they're getting this technology for extremely cheap, or if not free. And from the company's point of view, it's like, we want to get these kids for life, so they get them into their ecosystem, and then that's what they use. And what the trouble is, the teachers and the school heads and others, they've been sold on all the benefits, that's increased productivity, being able to do assessments so much better, more efficiently, all of this kind of side, do things quicker. But actually they're not told, unsurprisingly, about all the negatives. And a really interesting study by UNESCO, I think it's in 2023, they basically said, so to 2023, they basically found out, they said there's little robust evidence that digital technology actually adds value to education. So you've got these companies pushing this technology onto the school, and yet studies kind of show this isn't actually increasing the value of education. And so you've got all that kind of side of things as well, which is a real problem. But to answer your question, so my own sort of approach to technology, I mean, I felt that, I guess I'm trying to think when I got my first iPhone. So the iPhone came out in 2007, I believe. I didn't get it immediately, but I had an iPhone fairly sort of soon, sort of with a few years, I guess, after they came out. And I felt that after, probably 10 years after that or so, I was very much addicted to it. And I was using it all the time, all the typical things, taking photographs, which of course, when the way we take photographs is different now. We're essentially outsourcing our memory to a device. Yeah. How many times have you taken a photo of a poster, or something like that, or notice? Whereas before we would have either written it down or even noted it down. Whereas now we're offloading it to a device. So our brain is not actually having to remember and do the things it used to do. So I was doing all of that. I was using Google Maps, and the classic case with Google Maps, I so often used it when I knew exactly where I was going. And one thing where it was sort of triggered me, I'll go to Norwich fair bit, and I was going to Norwich this time, and I went by train, and then once I get off the train, I go to the house that I was going to. And I would always have my earphones in with Google Maps directing me. I was thinking, I know exactly where I'm going, but it was just habit. I would just do it out of habit. And then one of the things that I was into in a big way at the time was sport, and particularly football, tennis, and Formula One. And so I would be on the BBC Sport website multiple times a day. I would be I'd be watching, Match of the Day X sub-program. I'd be listening to Football Daily podcast. I'd be watching, that's as well as watching matches on Sky Sports or BT Sport, whatever it was then. And so this would be all quite consuming. And to show you the level of it, my friends would come to me to find out the latest information on their own teams. They might support different teams to me, and yet they knew that I would know more about what was happening with their teams than they would. And so it was just all consuming. And I tried to wean myself off. So I did things like switch the iPhone to grayscale. And that's a really good tip for people if you've not heard of that already, because I come from a design background, so I understand how colour works and the power of colour. And so the red on the notification buttons is designed specifically to trigger that anxiety. That's why warning signs are in red and things like that. So you pay attention. If you switch that to grayscale, it just becomes another shade of grey. So it just completely loses its impact. So things like that helped me getting rid of loads of apps. Probably at the same time I came off Facebook because I just felt it was just damaging for me. And so, and then a big thing happened when, my job, I've been working in digital marketing for sort of 25 years and sort of whatever, 20 years at the time. And part of what I was doing was actually training companies to create content that was sticking, that people would want to come back to. And I'm thinking, something's not right here. I'm struggling with looking at this content myself, and I'm coming off some of these social media platforms. And yet I'm telling people how to make this kind of content, which I don't like. And so I just had to stop that. So I pretty much stopped working a lot with social media, and I came off Instagram, came off Facebook already. And I just really lessened, and I stopped being involved in training anyone to do anything with social media. Then what then helped me a lot was in 2020, I started this course by Consciously Digital Institute, which I'm actually now repeating again because it's so much more information about AI. But it was a digital well-being coaching certificate. And interestingly enough, we started the course February 2020, 2 weeks before the first lockdown in the UK, first COVID lockdown. And so a few things happened there. The first thing was that I'd made a commitment to the group. There was a 6-month course. And I said, by the end of the course, I will have given up my smartphone. So that was one thing. And then, because I was watching things like football and sport all the time, what happened with the lockdown, of course, there wasn't any. So immediately, there wasn't any. And I was thinking, this is great. This is, I wasn't, very quickly, I just realized I just didn't miss it. And it was just fantastic. From watching, a few matches per week, since that time, since 2020, I've watched about 1.5 football matches in the whole, 5 years. And the other thing as well with the phones, so I did get rid of my smartphone, and I got an old Nokia, one of the old ones, back in there. But since then, I've now got 3 phones. I still have that iPhone, which I keep in the kitchen. I've got an Android smartphone, which I use for things like banking, and a business networking group. And I've got a digital minimalist phone, and I'm not remotely addicted to any of them. Yeah, which I couldn't, that wasn't the case 5 years ago. So, one of the things that sort of shows is that because of the lockdowns and the inability to watch anything, it's kind of like that changes our environment. Yeah. So if your environment is changed, in that case through no fault of my own, then that can actually have a lasting impact on your own habits. And there is research that kind of shows that. One example, which is the more famous example, is the example of Vietnam soldiers in the Vietnam War and their addiction to heroin. Yep. So you imagine being out in the jungles of Vietnam and you're seeing, death all around you, horrible situation all around you. Well, how do you cope? They coped, some of them coped by using heroin because it was accessible all around them. And so then you've got peers using it as well. And so it's easily accessible. But what they found was that once the war ended, and then these soldiers came home, only a small minority of them stayed addicted. And researchers were like, how does that happen? So they've been addicted, they were using it for, I don't know how long, but a decent period on end, which if anyone was using it for that period, that regularity, at the home in the West, then they would have been addicted in all intents and purposes. So what they found was basically it's the environment had changed. So all of those cues, James Clear, for example, in Atomic Habits, which is a book I highly recommend, he talks about your cue, talks about your craving, your response, and then your reward. And so this is like the sort of 4 laws of behavior change. And so their cue, they were out there. They saw everyone around taking heroin. And so it was a trigger for them. So then they had the craving. Yes, I want this, I need this. Also to cope with the horror that they were seeing. And then they have the response. So of course you can respond. You can either ignore it, but it's so powerful, when it sparks in your brain, the dopamine, the urge, the anticipation. And so they crave it, and their response was to have it. And then, of course, they get that reward, which then is a cycle, and then you want it again. So, but that's a really good, understanding that model can really help us with changing our own habits. And I can tell you directly how it's helped me very recently as well as changing my smartphone habits, is that, so one of the challenges I was having was in my evening routine at about 5:30, I try and finish up work. So whether I'm out and I come back in or whether I'm working from home, try and finish up. So I would then put a podcast on via YouTube on my Apple TV in my dining room. I'd send the sound to my kitchen, to the HomePod in my kitchen. So while I'm making dinner, I'm listening to the podcast. And then when I finish making the dinner, I take it back to the dining room and I sit in front of the TV and I watch the rest of the podcast. And of course, being YouTube, once the podcast finishes, I see something else, either something else auto plays or I see something else interesting and I click on it and I watch that. Sometimes, I kid you not, I was sitting there for 3 hours. 3 hours just watching video after video, which the algorithm thinks I would like. And it's just like, that's 3 hours I won't get back, And so one thing to change my environment, if you like, one of the things that I did, and this might seem drastic to some, but this works for me, is I put my Apple TV, the TV itself, and even my laptop and phone, put it all in a cupboard. So to access the Apple TV, I have to open this cupboard now. So that's one thing, that having some kind of like resistance, the friction that stops you, that at least makes you think, makes you have that system 2 thinking, do I really want to do this? And so, but also on the cupboard, I changed the handles on the cupboard so that I could put a lock on it. So I've put it's called a habit control lock, which you can set to a timer. So what I do at 5:30, I'll put a 2-hour timer on there. So I've got no access to my devices for the next 2 hours. And that in and of itself is sort of fine. But one of the important things about it is why? Why do you want to do that? And for me, I want to read more, and I've got so many books, you can probably see behind me, got so many books, and I want to read more, and I can't when I'm sitting for 3 hours watching YouTube. So now, if I don't have, after I finish dinner much quicker, by the way, which is the other interesting thing. And I don't listen, I'm having dinner in silence. So I don't, so I'm not even listening to music. And that gives me an opportunity to actually have more gratitude for the food, to actually savor the taste, to actually focus on those human things rather than be absorbed by whether it is music or podcast or whatever. So just having dinner in the quiet is really good. But then after that, because I finish much quicker because I'm not washing anything, I'll then wash up and then I can sit in my lounge and read. And I have my books there primed, ready, so I don't have to, there's no friction there. I just literally pick up the book and read. And, more often than not, in the weeks that I've been doing this, it works. So I've been reading a lot more. So just changing different things in your environment can really help you change your habits. But it's a good point to start with, is actually understanding, well, why do you want to do this? What's your goal behind it? Because you can do lots of the practical things to change a habit, but if you don't have that full motivation, then it just won't be, it won't necessarily be as powerful.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And it's just how, taking, I resonates with your journey as well. So I have done the grayscale on my phone. I've turned off all the notification on my phone. So I actually have to go in and check. And that has been a game changer for me. It doesn't stop me. I mean, this is the thing about you talking about resistance. That's some resistance. But actually going out for a walk without my phone, it's as you say, correct. And I love that habit lock. I might have to actually look at that as well. And we're going to be sort of run out of time. We were going to talk about some other things. So we'll probably have to get you back on to talk about those things as well, particularly about AI and our kids. We didn't actually get to that yet, because it's so interesting that we can talk about emerging technologies and technologies coming, but we have a real thing here of mobile phones, and they're still around. They're still getting updated. They're still going to be around for a while, and only going to evolve. And if they evolve in the way that a lot of the big companies want them to evolve, they're going to evolve in a way that's just going to make this problem more difficult. If we're using wearable technology that is basically a phone that we're wearing, or glasses, or embedded in our glasses, things that
in contact lenses.
Things that we wouldn't put into a cupboard because we're like, well, we need those things. So I think that is for another time. One of the other things, and I'm asking you about this because my recollection is vague on this, but I remember we spoke previously about an organization that's got a box that you can put your phone in, that when you put your phone in the box, and it's a charger, so you can put your phone in the box and a charger. When you close it, it basically doesn't allow any signals. So you can do that. And I know you can expand on this a little bit. And I remember one of the things that the testimonies on that was that how one of the parents had gone to the box and found the kid's device in there. So the child had gone, and deliberately put it in there to go and have some other quiet time. And I love what you said about intention. Isn't it that intention? Why am I doing this? Why, if you're just locking it up just because I don't want to do those things, well, if we don't want to do something, that's an away approach, isn't it? And if we're trying to go away from something, I really envisage it as looking at that thing and walking backwards. Whereas if we turn around and we say, actually, I want to play more on my guitar. Same as you, I also want to read books. I want to spend more time with my wife. I want to do more things with my friends. So having those focus on those things is really what we want to be looking at, as opposed to actually, looking at the things like you said. What do we want to actually do? Why are we doing it? What else do we want to do? Not just, I don't want to do a thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
This happens a lot with other addictions like smoking, alcohol. It's whenever you give up something, often they find people become addicted to something else. If they don't have I want to do this thing instead. If they have anything in mind that they're going to fill that time with, or feel that, this thing. I remember somebody saying once about smoking was that there's this thing that people have where when they bring their hand up to their mouth, they're expected to be a cigarette, and that can be a trigger for them wanting a cigarette.
Yeah, that's the cue.
The cue. And so instead of that, they just go and put their hand through their hair, So just trying to change that motion, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting with that in terms of our thinking about these habits, because just in terms of thinking critically, that using our sort of the system 2 part where we stop and take a step back, that enables us to think about the future and think about our intention. So we're both coaches, so one of the things we do is help people almost like visualize the future. Well, where is it that you want to be? What does that look like? What does that taste like? What does that feel like? So you're really helping people inhabit this space where all of these things are going well, and then it's working out, well, how do you get there? What's the one next step you can take? to get closer to that situation. So yeah, it's how we think is just vital, and I know we'll talk about that more on maybe another one.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And it's been so interesting to have this conversation with you. And actually, we said earlier the view of we're going to cover some things about AI in kids. We're going to cover some things about critical thinking in kids. So we'll definitely have to have you back, because actually there is so much to cover. Just in terms of really what I take from this is there is a reality that mobile phones are still a thing we need to tackle. And we talk about forward thinking. What we don't want to be doing is thinking too far forward and saying, well, actually, we're ignoring that or accepting. Go, well, that's it. We'll accept it and go, well, yeah, mobile phones, well, they are here to stay. But how we use them, we can change that.
Well, to give you an example of that, I mean, you think the iPhone came out 2007, and so we're now 20 years down the line, and only now are we talking about phone bans in school and things like that. So AI is basically smartphones and social media on steroids. Yeah. And again, I know we'll talk about that more in next time. It's how it affects our brains. And so we should be talking about that now. We can't wait 20 years. 20 years down the line is too late. So that's why it's so important to be talking about these things. And I've been to, say different sort of workshops on AI where the only question and thought is, how quickly can you implement this? What are the nice tools that you can use? There's no thought in terms of, well, okay, if I'm outsourcing my critical thinking to a device, how's that going to affect me in, 6 months' time, in a year's time, and so on. So it's a conversation we need to have. We need to keep having.
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on, Richard, because it's been really good. I think we feel like we've kind of in some respects, or I have anyway, I've come to a conclusion through this conversation, which is actually, as we've been talking about, and the concept of the Better with Humans podcast is how we look at a technology. And really, as you've just spoken about, how do we look at it in terms of what is the longer term impact going to be? Let's not wait and see and then try to retrospectively. You can understand why teenagers are up in arms going, you can't take our phones away. You can't, there's companies kind of social media. You can see why the countries want to do that. I think actually companies make countries. Why would we do that? Because the challenge is that actually it's much harder to take something away that somebody's being freely given.
Yeah.
And to not understand really why are you doing it? Because they're not really seeing the consequence. So helping people to understand the choices that we're making, and again, we'll cover that in more as well in actually the importance of us making choices and not just accepting what is given to us. But yeah, thank you so much, Richard. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.